All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Atheniano Show. Today we are going to be talking about an interview that happened recently between the Russian foreign minister Sergei Lavrov and Tucker Carlson. This was a very prominent interview that aired on YouTube and X and was seen by many, many people. Regardless of what you think of Tucker Carlson, I'm not really interested in what he had to say. I'm more interested in unpacking what Sergei Lavrov had to say and what it means. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to watch some clips from the interview, analyze it, fact check it, and talk about it. So please stay tuned. This will be a very thorough and interesting episode. Did a lot of research for it, and I'm looking forward to getting into it. But before we do, I think it's worth talking about who exactly Sergei Lavrov is. So he's the Russian foreign minister. He was born on March 21st, 1950, to an Armenian father and a Russian mother. His family's original surname was Kalantarian. He speaks five languages, including English, which we'll see from the interview, and he's been serving as Russia's foreign minister since 2004. He also has a daughter who attended Columbia University in New York and has spent most of her time living in between the US and the UK. Additionally, prior to serving as Russia's foreign minister, Lavrov worked in the Soviet foreign ministry starting in 1972 when he served as the Soviet ambassador to Sri Lanka. He also had a brief stint as the Soviet ambassador to the UN. Now, it's kind of ambiguous how much power or sway Lavrov has when it comes to determining or influence Russian foreign policy, but in 2013, he did reach an agreement with John Kerry to help foster the destruction of most of Syria's chemical weapons. Nevertheless, it is clear that this is not a rogue interview by any means, in the sense that Lavrov is very much speaking in a way that is ultimately coordinated with Putin and the Kremlin's vision of Russia's foreign policy, meaning he could believe what he's saying in these interviews, or in this interview, but it's also possible he does not believe what he's saying and is just repeating what Putin told him to say. I don't know. Okay, so let's get into the interview. First thing to note is about the nature of the interview. So before getting into the content, it's important to note that this was not the only interview done at the time. So parallel to the Tucker interview with Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov, CNN a day before did an interview with the deputy foreign minister of Russia, Sergei Rybakov. And this was a 35-minute interview, which I'll show some clips from that interview along with the Lavrov interview. The second thing, I think, kind of content-less part of the interview is that whatever you think about what he is saying, I think it's hard to come away with a conclusion that they both did not come across as intelligent and coherent and well-spoken people. These are not dumbos, right? These are people that know what they're doing, know what they're saying, and are good at saying it regardless of the content. But that's enough for my little spiel. Let's get into the actual content of the interview. I broke it down into main takeaways from the interviews. And so I'm going to start with a clip that I think really shows where Russia is in the process of this Ukraine war and kind of their line of thinking, particularly as it relates to their stubbornness and their unwilling to compromise and make a budge. So I'm going to play one clip from the Lavrov interview and then a second clip from the Rybakov interview. So I'm just going to plug in my computer because I don't want it to die before this starts, and then we are going to listen. So here is the Lavrov clip.
However, we also know that some officials in the Pentagon and in other places, including NATO, they started saying in the last few days something like, well, NATO is a defensive alliance, but sometimes you can strike first because the attack is the best defense. Some others in Stratcom, I think, Buchanan is his name, representative of Stratcom, he said something which allows for an eventuality of exchange of limited nuclear strikes. And this kind of threats are really worrying, because if they are following the logic which some Westerners have been pronouncing lately, that, well, don't believe that Russia has red lines, they announce their red lines, these red lines are being moved again and again and again, this is a very serious mistake. That's what I would like to say in response to this question.
So that was the Lavrov clip. Now here is the clip of Rybakov.
For a better solution, a more reasonable scenario will grow.
The way to walk back from that appears to be peace talks. How possible do you think peace talks are, and which areas is Russia willing to compromise in if peace talks happen?
We have laid out our position through presidential statement of June 14th. We know what Zelensky produces in terms of his plans and his suggestions. If you compare the two positions, they are seemingly incompatible, then cannot be brought together. Thus, I believe chances for a compromise at the moment are zero. The moment people in Kyiv begin to understand that there is no way that Russia will go the way they suggest, I think there might be openings and opportunities. I will tell you that over recent years, a number of countries came up with several ideas on how to move political dialogue forward. We are very attentive to these ideas. We engage these countries at all levels. We also have points where we criticize them, including our closest friends like China and the Chinese-Brazilian group of friends is something that we closely watch, although we believe there are deficiencies with this approach. So we not foreclose anything, but at the moment to compromise along the lines which the West and Kyiv believe is the way forward, chances for this are zero. The first point of order, the first action that should be taken by Washington, in my view, should be a very strong message to Kyiv that they should lift a prohibition that was self-imposed to have direct contacts with Russia. This would be the right beginning.
Zelensky recently said that, or hinted, that Ukraine would be willing to give up some of the territories that you currently hold in return for full NATO membership.
Full NATO membership is a non-starter. This is one of the reasons why Russia began this special military operation. I mean, it's not so that we have here a situation of land for peace. If we parallel this with the Middle East or somewhere else, that's not the point. We have a very clear position, a position of principle.
So I think actually the Rybakov clip is a lot more illuminating, right? He's saying, look, we have a clear position. We're not listening to anybody. There's going to be no third party mediator who's going to create some deal where we're compromising. We're sticking to our guns. We're not compromising. And if you want peace, you have to come and achieve peace on our terms. And when Lavrov talks about us having a red line, well, obviously he's talking about that in terms of nuclear strikes, right? There's a point that they're not going to tolerate. There is a point where they're going to say, look, we're past the point of no return. We're not going back. We don't care. You guys have crossed the red line. And he's stated very clearly that they do have that red line. And it's clear from Rybakov's answer that for the Russians, the point that is uncompromisable, that they're not willing to concede, is full NATO membership for Ukraine. That is not going to fly under their current leadership or current status. And so I think that is something that we probably knew for a while, but it's just worth hearing because it reiterates many of the kind of talking points that we hear from Putin and from other people, and just says that this is the official message that they're sticking to top down. Membership in NATO is not going to happen. So that's the first part I thought that was really interesting. The second part relates to what both Lavrov and Rybakov say is the cause for the war. And so I'm going to play these and then we'll discuss it. So here's a clip of Lavrov talking about the cause for the war. It's a short one.
It is not us who started the war. Putin repeatedly said that we started the operation in order to end the war which Kiev regime was conducting against its own people in the parts of Donbass. And just in his latest statement, the president clearly indicated that we are ready for any eventuality, but we strongly prefer peaceful solution through negotiations.
All right, that was the Lavrov clip. And what I think is important about this one is he talks about the cause for the war relates to the treatment of Russian citizens in Kiev. It's a problem with Kiev. Now, look at Rybakov's answer here.
The government in what is a fight for Russia to stay strong, to stay independent, for a Russia that makes a difference in the world, and not just Russia that is subordinate to people in Washington and people in Brussels. It's much less about Kyiv, it's much more about US, NATO, and collective West, as we call it.
So it is a direct confrontation between Russia and the West, and sort of the idea of the Russian president for a new world order, as he said that himself, hasn't he? One where, for instance, BRICS becomes more important as a power center, as an economic center. And that could lead you on a direct confrontation course with Donald Trump as well, because he just said that if BRICS wants to replace the dollar with another world currency, that the U.S. is going to fight that tooth and nail.
When the moment comes and President Trump is inaugurated, I think there would be opportunities to tell his people that we at BRICS do not want to replace dollar. We in BRICS want to develop a system that would allow us at BRICS to service what our economic operators need in parallel to what US and others may have. So it's a polyphonic world order, to use the word of President Putin from his Big Valdai presentation.
All right, so the main point here, right, is Lavrov really talks about and emphasizes, okay, it's the mistreatment of Russian citizens in Kyiv that's the problem. And then you have Rybakov turn around and say, no, it's not really about Kyiv. It's about preventing U.S. hegemony. It's creating a polyphonic world order, right, where there's multiple polarities. And that's really interesting that they actually give quite different answers, the foreign minister and the deputy foreign minister, as to why Russia is involved in this conflict and what the root of it is. Because one is saying, look, it's about Kiev and domestic situations in Ukraine. And the other is saying, no, it's much wider. It's about the U.S. It's about the U.S. and the collective West and preventing Russia being subordinate to the West and creating multiple polarities or vectors of power within the world, so that there is no global dominance by the West. And, to be fair, Lavrov does say something similar later in a speech where he says, and I'll just show this right now, it's not about the West being pro-West or pro-East. It's about not seeing one as a zero-sum game. So it's about not being completely pro-West and not being completely pro-East. It's about creating having multiple polarities of power, and not having it a zero-sum game. But I'll play that clip so you guys can see for yourself. Again, it's only 20 seconds.
Well, pro-Western is not bad, basically. Pro-Eastern is also not bad. What is bad is that you tell people either or. Either you go with me or you're my enemy.
And so this is so interesting. Number one, this is something, kind of the idea of multiple polarities is something that, as what's his name? The deputy prime minister, Rybakov, said, that Putin said in his famous or his infamous presentation at the Validol conference, I believe. I'll have to check that name in post-production, but also in Russia's foreign policy concept, the most recent one, 2023, where they consistently emphasize multiple polarities of world order. And what's really interesting is, like, all right, obviously the idea of a bipolar, and the idea that Lavrov is talking about, completely pro-West and completely pro-East, is a very Cold War era kind of thinking. And so it's quite interesting to me that he's seemingly trying to express that Russia is so much against that. Because I think there's an idea being floated a lot that, Russia wants to go back to Soviet times. Putin envisions going back to Soviet era, Soviet times, sees those as the glory days. And that may actually be true. But the way they're framing it is carefully constructed so it's not that. It's not going back to Soviet era time where it's Russia and the US. They're saying it's actually, there's multiple polarities of power where one country doesn't have a complete hegemonic control. And it actually ties back to something that I'll talk about much later in the video, about the theme of international cooperation and international organization. And the idea being, well, if there's not one hegemonic control or two hegemonic controls, or three dominant powers, two dominant powers, then you have to work collectively and arrive at decisions collectively through international organizations, through cooperation, through discussion. And so clearly that's something they're trying to push in the narrative, is Russia is pro-multiple polarity, pro-international organization, pro-modern world, post-polarity world. Is clearly something that they are interested in pushing out there. And part of it too might be like, Russia is not in a position to say we want to go back to do a two-polarity system, right? They're not in a position because you have China and other rising powers. And so the best Russia can do is this multipolar system. They're not in a position to challenge the US for hegemonic control because you have China, India, and a bunch of other countries. So their best option is to eliminate the hegemon and create a multipolar war. So some of it might just be circumstance. But anyway, let's go to the next part, because we talked about Lavrov and saying that the treatment of Russians inside Ukraine is the raison d'être for the war. And in his interview, Lavrov makes very specific accusations about what is happening to Russians inside Ukraine. And so it is worth talking about those. So I'm going to play the clip and then I'm going to essentially fact check him and talk about it. So here we go.
Through negotiations on the basis of respecting legitimate security interests of Russia and on the basis of respecting the people who live in Ukraine, who still live in Ukraine being Russians, and their basic human rights, language rights, religious rights have been exterminated by series of legislation passed by the Ukrainian parliament, and they started long before the special military operation. Since 2017, legislation was passed prohibiting Russian education in Russian, prohibiting Russian media operating in Ukraine, then prohibiting Ukrainian media working in Russian language, and the latest, of course, there were also steps to cancel any cultural events in Russian. Russian books were thrown out of libraries and exterminated. And the latest was the law prohibiting canonic Orthodox Church, Ukrainian Orthodox Church.
All right, so what is the evidence of of Ukrainians discriminating against Russians in Ukraine? Well, according to an article by Reuters and the Human Rights Watch, a law passed in Ukraine in 2019 made TV and film firms make 90% of their content in Ukrainian, and computer software being entirely in Ukrainian. And you might think, well, what's the problem with that? Well, there is a large amount of not only ethnic Russians, but predominantly Russian-speaking people in Ukraine, because there is a difference between being ethnically Russian and having Russian as your first language, because there's a lot of people who are not ethnically Russian in Ukraine, but still have Russian as their mother tongue. So this law does in some ways discriminate against that. And the law also allowed media to be in English and other EU languages, but not Russian. So it singled out no Russian language media, even though it was allowed to be in English and other EU languages. Another law in 2023, according to the news organization DW, a German outlet, said that a law was passed outlawing singing, performing, and playing Russian music. And so this is a quote from the article. Street musicians singing Russian songs in the Ukrainian capital Kyiv could soon face problems. Likewise, bars and restaurants playing Russian background music may end up getting in trouble. The reason is that the Kyiv City Council has issued a temporary ban on performing or showcasing Russian language art and culture, such as books, music, plays, and concerts in public. This ban also encompasses cultural and educational programs. The restriction not only applies to works by Russian authors and creators, but to all cultural products publicly presented in or translated into Russian. It also goes on to say that human rights activist Volodymyr Yavorsky of the Ukrainian Center for Civil Liberties said such bans are discriminatory and unconstitutional. Quote, "These are illegal decisions because local authorities have no right to regulate such issues and impose such bans," Yavorsky told DW. Quote, "That is why they have no legal consequences. The judiciary," he added, "has already deemed such local bans illegal." Also, in late summer of this year, the Ukrainian Orthodox of the Moscow Patriot, which has over 10,000 parishes in Ukraine and many Ukrainians supported, including famous boxer Alexander Usyk, was outlawed in Ukraine, was banned in Ukraine, which was not without controversy. And even before recent events, in 2014, after the Maidan Revolution, which the Russian government calls a coup. But anyway, regardless of whether you call it a coup or revolution, Viktor Yanukovych, the then president, was ousted. And according to a peer-reviewed study, which I'll put in the description, the Ukrainian government made a series of mistakes after that to increase tensions between its ethnic Russian and Ukrainian populations. So on February 22nd, the Ukrainian parliament ousted former ministers of the Party of Regions, which was Yanukovych's former party, and which enjoyed large support in the eastern part of Russia, the Russian-speaking part of Ukraine. So the Ukrainian parliament ousted the former ministers of that party. And then the new president, Alexander Turchinov, formed a transitional government after the Maidan Revolution, but did not include any members of the Party of Region, again, that party that enjoys large amount of support from the eastern part of Ukraine, in the transitional government, which was supposed to be a unity government. However, it did include members of the far-right party Svoboda, which the BBC has described as ultra-nationalist. And the EU Parliament said on March 21st, 2014, quote, "The All-Ukrainian Union Party, or Svoboda, is currently the fourth largest party in the Ukrainian Parliament and is part of the new interim government. Svoboda member Oleksandr Sich is now the deputy prime minister. The party itself has concealed its nationalist leanings and adopts the Nazi wolf's angel rune in its logo. The symbol, which resembles a swastika, was worn by members of the Waffen-SS in the Second World War and was condemned at the Nuremberg trials. Svoboda has been accused of promoting anti-Semitism and xenophobia." Now, as a result of these events, there were protests in Luhansk and Donetsk, and the protesters seized government buildings, set up a parallel government in Ukraine in these regions, and demanded a referendum on succession, which led to the Ukrainian forces launching a counterinsurgency against these protesters in April, which eventually led to the Donbass war between Russia and Ukraine. Now again, all of this does not mean that Russia was justified in their actions in invading Ukraine, but it probably is worth acknowledging that Ukraine made some mistakes along the way to increase tensions and sow divisions between Russians in Ukraine and Russia, which was then used by Russia as justification for the war. So Ukraine, it is, it's okay to acknowledge that Ukraine made some mistakes too, without thinking that Russia was completely justified in their actions. You can think that Russia was unjustified, but also acknowledge that the Ukrainian government made a lot of mistakes and errors to increase tensions between ethnic Russians and Ukrainians in Russia. And again, this information is all from a peer-reviewed journal article, which I will link in the description for you to read if you want. Okay, so now the next part of this interview that I want to talk about comes back to this idea of Russia's role in international organizations and upholding international law and being part of, the international new modern world order. So this is from Lavrov, and I will play it and then we'll talk about it. This is a 2-minute clip, so here we go.
The right for self-determination is the international legal basis for decolonization process, which took place in Africa on the basis of this charter principle, right for self-determination. The people in the colonies, they never treated the colonial powers, colonial masters, as somebody who represent them, as somebody whom they want to see in the structures which govern those lands. By the same token, the people in east and south of Ukraine, people in Donbass and Novorossiya, they don't consider the Zelensky regime as something which represents their interests. How can they, when their culture, their language, their traditions, their religion, all this was prohibited?
Yes.
And the last point is that if we speak about the UN Charter, resolutions, international law, the very first article of the UN Charter, which the West never recalls in the Ukrainian context, says respect human rights of everybody, irrespective of race, gender, language, or religion. Take any conflict. The United States, UK, Brussels, they would interfere saying, oh, human rights have been grossly violated. We must restore the human rights in such and such territory. On Ukraine, never, ever they mumbled the words human rights. Seeing these human rights for the Russian and Russian-speaking population being totally exterminated by law. So when people say, let's resolve the conflict on the basis of the Charter, yes, but don't forget that the Charter is not only about territorial integrity, and territorial integrity must be respected only if the governments are legitimate and if they respect the right of their own people.
All right, so a lot of things to talk about here, where Lavrov gives a justification for Russia's war based on the UN Charter. Now, a couple things. The UN Charter does say in Article 1 that its purpose is to, quote, achieve international cooperation in solving international problems of an economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian character, and in promoting and encouraging respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms for all, without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. But it does not say territorial integrity must be respected only if the government is legitimate and respects the rights of its own people, which Lavrov very carefully slips in, implying that the Charter does, right? His whole argument is the right to respect the territorial integrity of a country, or a country's right to territorial integrity is contingent on them having a legitimate government and also respecting the rights of all people in its country, regardless of race, sex, language, religion. And so for him, he's saying that because of that principle, which is not in the Charter, but he's saying because of that principle, Russia has a right to not respect Ukraine's territorial integrity because they were not respecting the people of the Russian language-speaking people in Ukraine. Now, Lavrov saying this signals that Russia views this idea, right, that territorial integrity is not applied to illegitimate governments or to governments that do not respect the human rights of all its people, signals that Russia may believe that it has the right to violate the territorial integrity of other countries if it views that that government is legitimate or does not respect the rights of its people. And of course, the occurrence of this, the occurrence of an illegitimate government or government that doesn't respect the rights of its people, is somewhat be contingent or subjective according to what Russia determines as illegitimate or not respecting the rights of its people. I just wonder, right? Like, does this mean that potentially Russia has the right to not respect China's territorial integrity for their mistreatment of Uyghurs? I don't know. Probably they would say that China's not mistreating Uyghurs. But, it raises an eyebrow, right? Like, so in what instances or how will Russia use this idea that they don't have to respect other countries' territorial integrity upon this condition? How will they use that? And what door does it open for them to justify the territorial intervention into more countries? It's certainly worth asking about. And you guys, I'll leave you guys in the chat to theorize about which situations Russia could use in the future to justify intervention based upon this principle. It's an interesting idea. The second point in this clip that I think is interesting is the appeal that Russia makes to the UN, as I said, and attempting to justify its actions within the UN. Now, this is, again, as I said, a recurring tactic in Russia's foreign policy. It's in Russia's 2023 foreign policy concept. It's prevalent in Russia's foreign policy documents. And in this interview alone, I counted 20 times that Lavrov either mentions the UN or refers to the UN. And so you have to kind of ask, why is he doing this? Why is he trying to sell Russia's position in the world in this war as being in line with the UN and international organizations? And particularly as Russia as being somebody who actually respects international law and order and respects the UN and international organizations. Particularly, right, because in this speech he talks about it in contrast to the West in the US. So why is he trying to make this argument, and who is he trying to sell this to? And I think, what we're seeing here is they're really trying to appeal to the global South and countries who have had their territorial integrity violated by the West. So former colonial countries, countries in MENA, the Middle East and North Africa, countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, Serbia potentially, and any country, as I said, where the U.S. and the West has intervened secretly or without UN approval. Right? It's using hypocrisy and very real mistakes and errors and violations of international law that the U.S. and other Western countries have done to, number one, water down what its own actions, but actually saying, well, how can we be, we're the enemy of those people who constantly violate international law and don't uphold it. So it's like two arguments. One, there's the argument that Lavrov makes inside the text about how Russia's actions are respecting international law and in accordance with international law. But then there's also the de facto. U.S. violates international law and doesn't uphold it, and we're the opposite of that. We're in opposition to that. So therefore, we are the ones in international law. And so it's really interesting that Lavrov is trying to do this. And again, it makes me wonder, like, what is the purpose of this interview, and what audience is he trying to sell it to? And I think in that regard, it was an interesting decision to do this interview in English, because clearly doing it in English potentially makes it more accessible to other countries outside of Eastern Europe and post-Soviet states. It's really an appeal to the wider world and the wider global South potentially, and maybe even just people in the U.S. who are discontent or fed up with the neoliberal neocons and people and U.S. and Western imperialism. And he also makes this reference to Africa, which, if you've been following Russian foreign policy at all, Russia has made a very aggressive and significant shift toward Africa to try to align themselves with Africa. Again, if you go and search up Russian foreign policy concept 2023, you will see that in the list of priorities that Russia has based on regions, Africa is much higher than in years past in their concept. So a signal that they are trying to move towards Africa and the global south more particularly. And he tries to equate what Russia is doing and really the struggle of ethnic Russians inside of Ukraine to the struggle of African countries for independence and their decolonization movement. And so, yeah, this is a really interesting move by Lavrov, and again, just signals where Russia's headed, what they're focused on. Clearly, it's the global south. Clearly, it's people who are fed up with U.S. and Western imperialism, and frankly, for good reasons. But it's also just there's a little bit of hypocrisy in it. And I'm not trying to say whether you buy this argument or not. It's clear that they're capitalizing on very real hypocrisies and very real flaws in U.S. and Western foreign policy, which will likely strike a chord, as I said, with many global South countries that have been affected by that. And in this line, it's also really interesting, and I think this is why he does it. He brings up, Lavrov brings up this story about Lindsey Graham and about him saying that the U.S. just wants to have control of Ukraine for its natural resources, which is obviously very familiar to former colonial countries. Now, regardless of whether or not it's true and that's actually what the U.S. wants to do, that's not the point. The point is he's trying to hit it home and connect Russia's struggle to the anti-imperial, anti-colonial struggle. So I'll play that clip because it's very short.
Lindsey Graham, who visited some time ago Zelensky for another talk, he bluntly, in presence of Zelensky, I think, said that Ukraine is very rich with rare earth metals, and we cannot leave this richness to the Russians. We must take it. We fight, so they fight for the regime which is ready to sell or to give to the West all the natural and human resources. We fight for the people.
Okay, give me 1 sec. I'm just gonna sneeze. All right. So then we have another part. Now we're going to turn to like the peace terms and peace negotiations. And in particular, this is a part of the interview where Lavrov talks about the Istanbul agreements and what was involved in the Istanbul agreements. And he makes the claim that they had a deal, but Boris Johnson blew it up and the deal was abandoned. So I'm going to play that and then we'll talk about it.
No. The Istanbul Principles. Yes. It was April 22.
Right.
Which was no NATO, but security guarantees to Ukraine collectively provided with the participation of Russia. And these security guarantees would not cover Crimea or the east of Ukraine. It was their proposal. And it was initialed. And the head of the Ukrainian delegation in Istanbul, who is now the chair of the Zelensky faction in the parliament, he recently, a few months ago, in an interview, he confirmed that this was the case. And on the basis of these principles, we were ready to draft a treaty. But then this gentleman who headed the Ukrainian delegation in Istanbul, he said that Boris Johnson visited and told them to continue to Then there was...
But Boris Johnson, on behalf of the
He said no, but the guy who initialed the paper, he said it was Boris Johnson.
All right. If you guys can find the interview where he says that this Ukrainian person admitted to this, please let me know. I couldn't find it. But if you can find it, please post it in the comments. Also, I couldn't find any evidence that the terms of the Istanbul Agreement were entirely proposed by Ukraine. But if you can find that, let me know. He says that the deal was for no NATO in Ukraine, collective security guarantees to Ukraine involving Russia in the collective security, but these guarantees would not cover Crimea and the east of Ukraine. Now, here's what I found about this. There was a New York Times article recently documenting the terms of the agreement, and they obtained the documents, the specific documents of the agreement. So this is what it says. This is what it says the terms were. Ukraine could not join NATO, but EU membership was possible except for Crimea and parts of eastern Ukraine. Also, that the article says that the Ukrainian collective security clause, which Lavrov mentions, was agreed to, but Russia tried to sneak in later at the last minute a permanent veto, which essentially forestalled the talks. So the idea was, well, yes, there's this collective security guarantee, but it has to be agreed upon by all countries participating, and Russia would be one of the countries participating. So at any time, Russia could just veto this collective security agreement whenever it was convenient. So that's ultimately what the New York Times reported forestalled the talks, which Lavrov did not mention. The deal also included Russian language laws being repealed and the reduction of Ukraine's military size. And Reuters reports that Ukraine and Russia were in fact very close to a deal. But in terms of whether or not Boris Johnson blew up the talks or not, an article by The Guardian I found reflecting on a study by historians Sergei Lavrov and Samuel Sharp, who are historians and a political scientist, concluded that Boris did not directly cancel the talks, but that in a broader philosophical sense, the skepticism of Western leaders about Russia's intentions and their commitment to aid Ukraine and their encouragement to Kyiv to fight on all added to the decision of the Russian government to continue to fight rather than negotiate. So the article claims that it wasn't so simple as Boris saying, don't sign this, and then they didn't sign this, but that the Western sentiment and the sentiment of the US and the UK and whatever largely influenced Ukraine's decision not to strike the deal and not to ultimately get the deal done. So there's truth and there's not truth to what Lavrov is saying, according to this article. Now, another interesting part related to this is he says later on that the terms are actually different. So the terms of the Istanbul Agreement are no longer applicable. And I'll play that clip if I have it. Yeah, I think this is it. Here we go.
no NATO.
No NATO, absolutely. No military bases. No military exercises on the Ukrainian soil with participation of foreign troops. And this is something which he reiterated. But of course,
I'm not sure what he was putting in his pocket there. Let me know if you guys can figure that out and slow it down. But anyway, I'll continue.
He said it was April 2022. Now some time has passed. And the realities on the ground would have to be taken into account and accepted. The realities on the ground are not only the line of contact, but also the changes in the Russian constitution after referendum was held in Donetsk, Lugansk republics and Kherson and Zaporozhye regions.
Yes.
And they are now part of the Russian Federation according to the constitution, and this is a reality. And of course, we cannot tolerate a deal which would keep the legislation, which I quoted, prohibiting Russian language, Russian media, Russian culture, Ukrainian Orthodox Church, because it is a violation of the obligations of Ukraine under the UN Charter, and somebody must be done about it. And the fact that the West, since this Russophobic legislative offensive started in 2017, and the West was totally silent, and it is silent until now, of course, we would have to pay attention to this in a very special way.
So this is significant insofar as it means that a re-proposal of the Istanbul Agreement would not suffice for the Russians, at least according to Lavrov. They need to go further than Lavrov, given the state of the war and the things that have happened since April 2022. The next part I want to talk about is this really interesting moment when Carlson doesn't ask him a question about Bucha or Alexander Navalny, but he just brings it up out of the blue. And it's really interesting. I don't know why he does it, because you would think those would be subjects that Russia would be trying to avoid, Russia would be trying to hide, not have come to the limelight, but he just brings it up out of nowhere and starts talking about it, and I don't know why. So let's play that. It was very strange to me. So here we go. And this is a longer clip. It's about 6 minutes, but I'm going to play the whole thing because it really is truly bizarre to me.
The people say it was Putin who ruined the deal because of the massacre in Bucha. But massacre in Bucha is something which they never mentioned anymore. Massacre in Bucha. I do, and we do. In a sense, they are on the defensive. Several times in the United Nations Security Council, sitting at the table with Antonio Guterres, 2 years ago and last year, last year and this year, the General Assembly, I raised the issue of Bucha and said, guys, it is strange that you are silent about Bucha because you were very vocal when BBC team found itself on a street where the bodies were located. And can we, I inquired, can we get the names of the persons whose bodies were broadcast by BBC? Total silence. I addressed Antonio Guterres personally in the presence of the Security Council members. He did not respond. Then at my press conference in New York, after the end of the General Assembly last September, I asked all the correspondents, guys, you are journalists. Maybe you're not an investigative journalist, but journalists normally are interested to get the truth. And Bucha thing, which was played all over the media outlets condemning Russia, is not of any interest to anyone. Politicians, UN officials, and now even journalists. I asked them, when I talked to them in September, please, as professional people, try to get the names of those whose bodies were shown in Bucha. No answer. Just like we don't have any answer to the question, where is the results of medical analysis of Alexei Navalny, who died recently, but who was treated in Germany in the fall of 2020, when he felt bad on a plane over Russia. The plane landed, He was treated by the Russian doctors in Siberia. Then the Germans wanted to take him. We immediately allowed the plane to come. They took him. In less than 24 hours, he was in Germany. And then the Germans continued to say that we poisoned him. And we asked them, can you, and they announced that the analysis confirmed that he was poisoned. We asked for the test results to be given to us. They said, no, we give it to organization on chemical weapons. We went to this organization, we are members, and we said, can you show to us, because this is our citizen, we are accused of having poisoned him. They said, the Germans told us not to give it to you because they found nothing in the civilian hospital. And the announcement that he was poisoned was made after he was treated in a military hospital, Bundeswehr hospital. So it seems that this secret is not going.
So how did Navalny die?
Well, he died serving the term in Russia. But he, during, as far as it was reported, every now and then he felt not well, which was another reason why we continued to ask the Germans, can you show us the results which you found? Because we did not find what they found. And what they did to him, I don't know.
What the Germans did to him?
Yeah, because they don't explain to anybody, including us. Or maybe they explain to the Americans. Maybe this is credible, but they never told us how they treated him, what they found, and what methods they were using.
How do you think he died?
I'm not a doctor, but for anybody to guess, even for the doctors to try to guess, they need to have information. And if the person was taken to Germany to be treated after he had been poisoned, the results of the tests cannot be secret. We still cannot get anything credible on the fate of Sergei Skripal and his daughter. The information is not provided to us. He is our citizen, she is our citizen, and we have all the rights and the conventions which the UK is party to get information.
All right, so that was weird and long. For those of you who don't know, the Bucha massacre was the reported death of the UN reported death of 73 to 178 Ukrainian civilians and prisoners of war by Russians during the fight for Bucha in the early stages of the war. And of course, Navalny was the opposition leader to Russia, who was, many people believe, was poisoned by Russia in Crimea, on a flight to Crimea with Novichok agent, and then was likely killed or starved or whatever in a Russian jail cell upon returning to Russia. So I don't know why Lavrov would bring this stuff up. These seemingly are not good things for the Russian state to bring up and to highlight. And again, Carlson didn't ask about it. He didn't bring it up. Lavrov did. Let me know in the comments, like, what you guys think is the reason Lavrov is doing this. Maybe it's like an emotional mind games. Or sorry, it's just the mind games. Like, he's saying, I don't know what happened. And by just bringing it up unpromptedly, he's hoping that people think, like, he generally doesn't know and that he's innocent, because otherwise, why would he be bringing it up? He legitimately doesn't know and actually is looking for information, and then maybe the thing they've been told and it's been reported by numerous organizations is not true. Like, maybe it's just like the ridiculousness, the mind game is the ridiculousness of him bringing it up and actually wanting to talk about it is going to make people think that the official story that they've heard is not true. I don't know. I don't know why he's bringing this up, but it's really interesting to me. And I'd frankly like to hear more from people why they think it is. I haven't been to Bucha. I wasn't there, but I know what a lot of organizations reported. And so it'd be great to just put everything he was saying to rest and just say it was complete bullshit. So if you're out there and you have that information to do that, please put it in the chat and please let me know. But until now, I have a reason to believe that things Lavrov said is not correct. But again, I don't have any I wasn't able to verify a lot of information. It was just stuff people have reported, and images of it. But it would be great if people would come out with the names and the exact details, because I think that would help quell a lot of the mysticism that probably Lavrov is creating by saying this. So please let me know in the comments if you're able to do that. I couldn't find it, but I might have just not been looking hard enough. So please let me know. All right, the final parts I want to turn to in this long video goes back to stuff Rybakov had talked about, and it's related to stuff he said about Trump and the new administration. So this first clip is about a minute and is related to Rybakov's comments regarding Trump saying that he can end the war within 24 hours of assuming office, and kind of this promise he made to end the war really quickly. So watch what Rybakov, the Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia, had to say about that.
Do you think that the Trump administration will follow through on its pledge, or Donald Trump will follow through on his pledge to try and solve the crisis as fast as possible?
We have never
or that
heard,
he can?
We have never heard anything from him or his team directly. We only saw what was made public by some people in his entourage. We saw equally some statements by President-elect Trump from his electoral campaign time, when he said that he can resolve this issue in 24 hours. 24 hours was probably a word he used in order to attract additional sympathies among voters. Some conflicts cannot be even resolved in 24 years, as we see it in the Middle East. But I'm not suggesting anything otherwise than the moment when these people decide to come up with some ideas, we will be there. We will definitely have a very careful look. But please make no mistake, not at the expense of what are the basic elements of our national position.
So if you want the very mundane translation of this answer, it's Trump was just talking bullshit out of his ass when it came to the Russia-Ukraine policy. He hasn't said anything substantial to the Russians. He hasn't been in a communication. There's nothing that Rybakov said suggested that Trump is in a position to end the war in 24 hours. He even makes that smile remark. He probably just said that to attract domestic support, but in reality he probably can't do that. And again, made clear as kind of making full circle to the very beginning of the stuff I was talking about, made clear the war will be negotiated on Russia's terms. And they're not budging about their terms. They're not moving. He says, make no mistake about that. So it's clear there's going to be no special treatment for Trump just because he's Trump. He still would have to bend to Russia's terms in order to negotiate a deal. More specifically, get Zelensky to bend to Russia's terms in order to get a deal done. which we'll see if he does that. I don't know, but it's not just going to be Trump imposing his will on Russia and telling them to do things and then having them do it. That's not going to happen. And he hasn't put forward any kind of strategic plan for how he's going to do it, which is not surprising because all he said in the campaign was he's going to end it in 24 hours, but didn't give a specific plan, or didn't seem, obviously he was not going to give a specific plan publicly as to the exact way he's going to do it, but there was very little detail about what he's going to do, what he's going to try to do, and clearly he hasn't spoken to the Russians or any communication or hasn't told them anything about how that might happen. I could be wrong, and he could do it in the White House and have this genius plan that nobody knows about and put it into fruition, but this part basically confirms that Russia's very skeptical about that, and there is no crystal ball that's waiting in the wings for when Trump gets into office. And the last clip I want to play is just about the future of the war under a Trump presidency. Because again, we kind of have this idea that, oh, Trump's going to smooth things out and make relations better. But Rybakov expresses a lot of skepticism about that and essentially shuts it down in this clip. So this is the last clip I'm going to play. So here it is.
Make any difference, though, in what we believe would be right for Russia to do. And then when the next administration comes, you asked about expectations or hopes. Look, we had a strange situation during Trump 1 when it was kind of a sense of different people coming, but policies towards Russia moved from bad to worse. Literally, he imposed many more sanctions than Obama did. He destroyed at least two very important arms control treaties. And some of his closest aides at that moment, they just advertised for this policy like something that makes everyone happier around in the world.
All right, so here we have just kind of a confirmation that actually Rybakov is saying Trump doesn't have a crystal ball. And in the first administration, he made things worse with Russia. Not just worse with Russia, but actually for international safety. And a treaty Trump scrapped allowed Russia to get new weapons and escalate things. So, look, and even pointed out that Trump said one thing in his first term, but actually did something completely different. So look, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have a crystal ball about the future, but this is interesting looking forward that actually, for people that are just thinking that Trump is going to come in and this war is going to magically go away, Rybakov is saying that's not how it's going to happen. Trump is going to have to change his policies, change policies from Biden, and bend toward Russia's needs. Russia is not willing to budge. And that's the overarching message that I got from this. Russia is not willing to budge. And so, the new administration is going to have to figure out if they want to end the war so quickly as they're saying. They're going to figure out how to do it in that context of Russia not being willing to budge. So that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. It took me a while to research it and get it all together. Hopefully it was informative. Hopefully you learned something. Please let me know in the comments any additional information you have, what you thought of this video, what you thought of the interview, and what you thought about my commentary. I'd really appreciate it. Give this video a thumbs up. I didn't get it this time. Yeah. Subscribe if you like. Recommend it to others. Give your feedback in the comments. I really, really, really want to know what you guys think. And if you found this helpful, would love to do more videos like this. And if you know something about this, if you're a scholar and want to come on the podcast to discuss, I would love to drop some note in the comments about it. I'll send you my email and we'll make it happen. But yeah, that's all from me. Thank you guys so much for watching. It's a really complicated situation. There's a lot to discuss. I know tensions are high because of it, but it's important that we talk about it and get through all the nuances. And I know Zelensky is doing an interview soon with Lex Friedman, so I'd love to do a video reacting to that soon as well. But let me know what other kind of political things you guys would like me to react to and analyze. So that's it from me. Peace out. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a wonderful rest of your week, and God bless. Peace.